Well, here we are with our Sunday school lesson for April the 24th. Last week we celebrated Easter, and I'm still thinking about the crowd that we had in our church and how wonderful that was. I said something to one of our senior pastors when we got finished and we were walking out. I said, wonder if we can do this again next week. And as we know, the week after Easter is typically a very low Sunday on attendance, but hopefully we had people that were excited to be together, to worship together, and it was just a wonderful day. I also hope that during Holy Week that you were able to take time to immerse yourself. I use that term a lot, to immerse yourself in the Holy Week and all that it means. And it was a good week. The services were wonderful as we reflect on Jesus, as we reflect on that week from the triumphal entry through the crucifixion and of course the resurrection that we celebrate on Easter Sunday. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed doing on Easter, if the weather permits certainly, is Easter sunrise service. And I don't know, there's just something about that is very special. And as I was sitting there this Sunday, we had our Easter sunrise service. We had chairs set up in a parking lot with the backdrop being the Mount Zion Cemetery. And beyond the cemetery, we could see the sun come up. And there was a little bit of low cloud cover. And as I sat there and reflected on that, and I looked at that sun coming up, I thought, that's the very same sun that Mary and Martha and Salome, that they saw when they went to the tomb. The very same sun. And as we reflect today on our Sunday school lesson, we're going to be talking about one of the Psalms, a creation psalm, that as we reflect on that, that's the very same sun that David, who is attributed to writing this psalm that we're going to look at today, that's the very same sun that David, when he was out tending Jesse, his father's sheep, and he was out in the field with them, that was the same sun that he would have looked at in the morning thousands of years ago, because there hasn't been a new sun made. And I think sometimes we don't take time to really reflect, and it's one of the things I'm going to talk about today. I want to reflect on the fact that it's so important to just slow down, clear our minds, and truly reflect on the words of this psalm and on the majesty of everything that God created. And so as we look at that, we're going to look today at Psalm 104. And it comes from our quarterly. And the purpose statement is to rejoice in the beauty of God's creation. And we're only going to read, when we get ready to read some of the words, it's a long psalm. And I would encourage you to take time to go ahead and read all of it and to really spend time and think about over the years the ways that God has touched us with His creation. And we're, as I say, we're only going to read certain passages. But we know that God created the world for us. And in Genesis, we read that it was given for us to take care of. One of the things that our lesson pointed out, and I'd actually kind of forgotten about it, is that Earth Day, which we celebrated just a couple of days ago on April the 22nd, but Earth Day, the very first Earth Day, was April 22nd, 1970. And I thought, okay, from my perspective, April 22nd, 1970, I was about 6 weeks from graduating from high school. I was thinking about going to the prom. I was thinking about going to college after high school. But I really didn't have any recollection of Earth Day and any celebration. Our Sunday school lesson indicated that there were colleges that celebrated it and high schools and people that very first Earth Day. So I went back to actually my class and I sent a message out and I said, anybody remember Earth Day? And sure enough, a couple of people pointed out that in our class yearbook, yes, there were pictures of that very first Earth Day celebration. So it's been, 52 years now since we first took the time as a nation to step back and give thanks for the creation that God gave us to take care of. And so as we look at that, we do want to reflect on how important that is, that we take care of the creation. Dr. Wernher von Braun, who a lot of you will remember, he's the scientist who helped our nation launch the space program. And he once wrote, one cannot be exposed to the law and order of the universe without concluding that there must be design and purpose behind it all. The better we understand the intricacies of the universe and all its harbors, the more reason we have found to marvel at the inherent design upon which it is based. Dr. von Braun concluded that all this pointed to a marvelous creator. He said that it was in the law and order of the universe that he saw God's handiwork. Now, let's face it, you don't have to be a scientist to see and marvel at that order of creation. I mean, there's things all around us, and I think sometimes we get so busy with our daily life that we don't think about it. I mean, go to the grocery store and look at the fruit. Each watermelon has an even number of stripes on its rind. Buy an orange, cut it open, and the orange will have exactly the same number of segments as every other orange. I know I commented, I think we were talking about the creation Psalms last fall. And as I drive back and forth to southern Ohio to visit my parents, and of course I grew up there, and I marvel at the work that farmers do and how important farmers are. And I think about the number of farmers that I've known in my life that are so faithful to their witness. And I know I've shared this before, when I think about this time of year, they're now preparing the soil. They're now preparing God's soil. And they're preparing that soil, and they may put some fertilizer in it, and they'll eventually plant corn or soybeans. But when they do that, then they plant that corn, they're going to plant a seed of corn into God's soil that they've prepared. And with God's rain and God's sun, eventually that corn will germinate and will grow a stalk and produce other ears of corn. And an average ear of corn is 800 kernels in 16 rows. That's amazing. I mean, that repeats itself over and over and over again. And it's no wonder that farmers are so faithful to the Lord, because they do their part, but then they turn it over to God, and He does His part. Now, one of the things that I thought about as I was preparing this lesson today and I was reflecting on is, why do people not want to acknowledge the creation? Why do they not respect the creation? Why do they not understand? And I saw a sign just this past week in front of a church. This is God's house. Take care of it. And the implication certainly was, since it was Earth Week, that this is all God's house. Take care of it. And one of the things that I reflected on, and I was reading a couple of different commentaries, was that people tend to not want to acknowledge the creation because of their own downfall, because of their own sin. And it makes them uncomfortable. It makes them uncomfortable when they think that I've sinned in many ways. I've had people say there's bigger sins or smaller sins, and yeah, okay, I guess I kind of understand what the point is, but the reality is sin is sin. And I think sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that we are falling short. The psychiatrist Carl Menninger, and I know many of you have heard of him, he said if he could convince the patients in psychiatric hospitals that their sins were forgiven, 75% of them could walk out the next day. He said, in a way, many of these people had run away from God, and their sins kept them in a mental prison. If you think about it, in the beginning, Adam and Eve sinned by taking the fruit of the forbidden tree, the fruit that because they wanted perfect knowledge. And what's the first thing Adam did? He ran away. He ran away. But God didn't give up. God came looking for him. And that's true for so many of us. When we do something, we're embarrassed about it, we're upset about it, it's something that we know that's been wrong. And so what do we want to do? We want to run away from God. And we don't want to recognize that God surrounds us with His creation. And so when we do that, we're separated. I think it's also interesting when we think about Psalm 104 that it was sung by the Jews during the Day of Atonement. Now, the Day of Atonement was a special holy day for the Jewish people because it was on that one day of the year that the high priest would make a sacrifice for the sins of all people. And he would enter into the Holy of Holies, they believed, into God's presence, and place the blood of the sacrifice on the mercy seat, and the sins of the people would be covered. And when the high priest fulfilled this task, the sins of the people were forgiven. And it was during this holy day that Israelites could sense in a very real way the closeness of God. And it was during this holy day that the barrier that stood between them and God was broken down, and they could again sense that God truly was with them. And they read this psalm that we have titled Psalm 104. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read the selected verses from the psalm, and there are selected verses that are in your quarterly. It says, let my whole being bless the Lord. Lord my God, how fantastic you are. You are clothed in glory and grandeur. You wear light like a robe. You open the skies like a curtain. You establish the earth on its foundations so that it will never fall. You covered it with the watery deep like a piece of clothing. The waters were higher than the mountains. You put gushing springs into dry riverbeds. They flow between the mountains, providing water for every wild animal. The wild donkeys quench their thirst. Overhead, the birds in the sky make their home, chirping loudly in the trees. From your lofty house you water the mountains. The earth is filled full by the fruit of what you've done. You make grass grow for cattle. You make plants for human farming in order to get food from the ground. God made the moon for the seasons and the sun too, which knows when to set. You bring on the darkness, and it is night when every forest animal prowls. Lord, you have done so many things. You made them all so wisely. The earth is full of your creation, and then there's the sea, wide and deep, with its countless creatures, living things both small and large. There go the ships on it, and Leviathan, which you made, plays in it. All your creatures wait for you to give them their food on time. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled completely full. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God while I'm still alive. Let me praise be pleasing to him. I'm rejoicing in the Lord. And as I say, I encourage you to read all of it because it's beautiful. I mean, one of the most astounding things that God has given us and God has done for us is that he's created the universe. And I think there's a couple of questions that we want to ask ourselves as we reflect on this lesson. Does God take pleasure in his creation? And if so, why? And I think with a resounding yes, you would say yes, he's pleased with his creation. He's pleased with what he's done. Genesis 1 tells us that God ordered creation, and then he responded to the creation. 5 times God stands back and comments, and God saw that it was good. And when all was finished and man and woman were created in his own image, it says, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. So this tells us that God was delighted with this work of creation. And when he looked at it, he gave it this sense of pleasure. And so this Psalm 104 expresses the joy that God has in his creation. So the answer to this first question is definitely yes. God was happy with his creation. And then I think the next question that we have to ask is, why was he so happy? I think that he rejoiced in his creation because it expressed his glory. And this is what we studied Psalm 19 a couple of months ago. And in that psalm we declared, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showed his handiwork. So the creation expresses his glory. The creation praises him continuously every day. Every day that we get up and look around, and God has given us that day to use. And we see how creation praises God. Creation reveals his wisdom. I'm intrigued, and if you take time to think about it, I mean little things that, first of all, spring is my very favorite time of year. I love spring. I love spring because the bulbs that have been in the ground during winter come up and we see flowers, and I love beautiful flowers. I love the Easter cross that we had in the church this year. I love the work that goes into the Easter cross. It's a Sunday school lesson in and of itself. You take the cross, which is made of aluminum and chicken wire, you bring God's creation, the flowers, to it. You have a group of God's creation, of a lot of women from the church have participated, each with a particular role. And at the end of the whole process, this beautiful, beautiful cross is created. And it was all done because of his wisdom. Every single part of that was because of God's wisdom. He made it fit. We had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago We happen to be at the Biltmore. We like going to Biltmore. It's a great place not just to go in the house, but just to be on the grounds. And we were driving down one of the roads, and there was a group of about 5 turkeys, and a couple of them had their tail feathers all fanned out, and they were kind of prancing around. When we got closer to them, we saw 2 geese. And the 2 geese were honking and carrying on and raising their necks up and down at the turkeys. And as we got even closer, we saw 3 little goslings, 3 little baby geese that were underneath one of the geese. And the 2 geese were trying to protect them from the turkeys. And I think about how that's God. God created the turkeys for a purpose. The turkeys, yes, they were picking on the geese for whatever reason, to get at the goslings or whatever reason. And the goslings were there to protect these little babies, and God made it that way. God created that in that mother goose who had laid those eggs and had taken care of them until they hatched. And now here were these little babies. I think the 4th thing that we look at when we think about creation is it reveals His power. No other being, no other individual could do what God did. Everything that we have, when I think about driving around, I think, yes, I'm trying to be careful on the road and avoid all the crazy stuff that goes on. People in front, people behind, people to the side, driving at 70 miles an hour on the interstate. But I'm amazed when I drive in the mountains or when I drive near the ocean, and I think about this great power that God unleashed when He created the universe. And then through it all, I think the central theme, the central most important thing for us to think about is all of creation points to God Himself. We don't have to stop and think about it, because we need to think about it every day. When we drive around, when we look around, when we look at the trees, when we look at the grass, when we look at the birds, referenced, all this referenced in our lesson today. Everything points to God. And He's given us all of those things to take care of. The very change of seasons, I've mentioned this before, one of my favorite, and I've got a couple. I've mentioned Zig Ziglar before. The other person that I go to and I'm thinking about motivational speaking is Jim Rohn. And Jim Rohn, when he was living, when he was speaking, he would often talk about the master teacher. And he said, when you want to focus your life, when you want to order your life, when you want to get something accomplished, when you want to be motivated, don't worry about the things that are already taken care of. He said, what happens after spring? What comes next? Summer. After summer is fall, and after fall is winter. And the sun, the earth orbits the sun in a particular way, in a particular time frame, and at a particular distance to create those seasons. And you don't have to worry about it, because God has taken care of all of it. And we need to give thanks for that. But in the end, it will not be the seas or the mountains or the canyons or the clouds or the birds or the great galaxies that will fill our hearts with wonder and fill our mouths with praise. But it will be God Himself when we meet Him face to face. In the meantime, embrace everything that we've been given and share that message with other people. Will you pray with me, my friends? Our gracious Heavenly Father, I give You thanks for today. I give You thanks for this day that You've given us. I give You thanks for the creation, that everything that surrounds us You've provided. And we just ask that as we go throughout this week that we keep our eyes open to the opportunities to see new and wondrous things. You keep our ears open to the things You want us to hear, and our hearts overflowing with that message of love that You have put in each and every one of us. In His name we pray. Amen. I love you, my friends, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.